The wind howled through the empty streets of the small town just outside Chicago. It was one of those nights where the cold felt like it could cut right through you. Snow had fallen earlier in the day, leaving everything covered in a thin white layer that sparkled faintly under the dim glow of the streetlights. Most people were already indoors, cozy and warm, sipping hot cocoa or watching TV, but not everyone. Reverend Daniel Hayes tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his old pickup truck as he drove slowly down the quiet roads. The heater inside. The vehicle wasn't working well, so he kept his jacket zipped up all the way to his neck. He'd spent most of the evening at his church, leading a service for a handful of congregants who braved the weather to attend. Now as he made his way home, something told him to take a different route, a longer one that passed by some of the less traveled parts of town. As he turned onto a side street lined with closed shops and abandoned buildings, Daniel's headlights caught movement in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a stray dog or maybe even a trick of the light reflecting off the snow. But then he saw it more clearly. There was someone huddled in an alleyway behind a diner that had been shut down months ago. Daniel slowed the truck to a stop and leaned forward, squinting through the frosty windshield. The figure didn't move much, just shifted slightly as if trying to stay warm. Without thinking too hard about it, Daniel grabbed a heavy woolen blanket from the back seat and stepped out into the biting cold. His boots crunched softly against the icy pavement as he approached. "Hello?" Daniel called out gently, not wanting to startle whoever it was. "Are you okay?" There was no immediate response. As he got closer, he realized the person was a child, a boy probably no older than 12. The boy's face was partially hidden beneath layers of dirty blankets, but his wide eyes peeked out, full of fear and suspicion. His cheeks were red from the cold, and his lips looked chapped. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The boy simply stared at Daniel, unsure whether to trust this stranger standing over him. "It's freezing out here," Daniel said after a pause, keeping his voice calm and steady. "You shouldn't be out in this kind of weather." The boy blinked but still didn't speak. Instead, he pulled the blankets tighter around himself, as though they offered some sort of protection. Daniel noticed the boy's clothes were torn and far too thin for such a cold night. One of his shoes was missing, leaving a bare foot exposed to the snow. "I'm Reverend Hayes," Daniel continued, crouching down to meet the boy's gaze. "I work at the church down the road. I'd like to help you if I can." For a long moment, the boy seemed to weigh his options. Then, finally, he nodded almost imperceptibly. Daniel smiled warmly and held out the blanket. "Here, take this. It'll keep you warmer." Hesitant at first, the boy reached out and accepted the blanket. His hands were trembling, not just from the cold, Daniel guessed, but also from hunger and exhaustion. Once the blanket was wrapped securely around him, Daniel opened his coat pocket and pulled out a granola bar he'd brought along for the drive. "Do you want something to eat?" This time the boy nodded more eagerly. He unwrapped the bar with shaky fingers and took a small bite, chewing slowly as if savoring every crumb. Watching him, Daniel felt a pang of sadness. No child should have to endure this kind of hardship. "What's your name?" Daniel asked softly. "Ethan," the boy mumbled between bites. "Well, Ethan, my truck is right over there." Daniel pointed toward the vehicle idling at the curb. "It's warm inside. Why don't we get you out of this cold, at least for tonight?" Ethan hesitated again, glancing nervously at the truck, and then back at Daniel. "Why are you helping? Me?" he asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel tilted his head, considering the question. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply, "and because God puts us in each other's paths for a reason." That seemed to satisfy Ethan enough to make him nod once more. Slowly, he stood up, clutching the blanket tightly around his shoulders. Daniel guided him to the passenger side of the truck and helped him climb in. The warmth from the cab enveloped them both immediately, and Ethan let out a soft sigh of relief. As they drove away from the alley, Daniel glanced over at the boy. Ethan was staring out the window, his breath fogging up the glass. There was something about the way he carried himself, quiet, observant, intelligent, that made Daniel wonder what kind of life he'd led before ending up alone on the streets. When They arrived at the parsonage attached to the church. Daniel ushered Ethan inside and set about making him comfortable. He found some clean clothes that had been donated to the church and heated up a bowl of soup on the stove. While Ethan ate, Daniel sat across from him at the small kitchen table, asking gentle questions about his past. Bit by bit, Ethan began to open up. He told Daniel that he'd run away from home months ago because his parents fought constantly and sometimes hurt him when they were angry. He'd been living on the streets ever since, moving from place to place to avoid being caught. Despite everything, Ethan spoke with a maturity beyond his years, his words careful and measured. By the time they finished talking, it was late, and Ethan was struggling to keep his eyes open. Daniel showed him to the spare bedroom, where a bed with fresh sheets awaited. As Ethan climbed under the covers, Daniel prayed silently, thanking God for bringing him to that alleyway tonight. Over the next few weeks, Daniel did everything he could to provide stability for Ethan. He enrolled him in school, introduced him to the congregation, and even taught him how to play chess during quiet evenings at the parsonage. Ethan thrived under Daniel's care, blossoming into a bright and curious young boy. Yet despite the progress he made, there was always a part of Ethan that seemed distant, as though he were carrying secrets he couldn't share. Little did Daniel know those secrets would one day change not only their lives but the entire world. As the months passed, Ethan settled into life at the parsonage. It wasn't easy at first. He still had nightmares about his past, and sometimes he would wake up crying in the middle of the night. But Daniel was always there, offering comfort and reassurance. Slowly but surely, Ethan began to feel safe again. He started attending school regularly, making friends, and even joining the chess club, which Daniel encouraged him to try. But what truly fascinated Ethan was the world beyond Earth. From the moment he stepped into Daniel's home, he noticed the books lining the shelves, books about space exploration, planets, and distant galaxies. At first, Ethan flipped through them out of curiosity, but soon he found himself completely absorbed. Every evening after finishing his homework, he'd sit by the window with one of those books, gazing at the stars outside, as if trying to imagine what lay beyond. One night, as they sat together in the living room, Daniel noticed Ethan staring intently at a picture of Saturn in one of the astronomy books. "You really like space, don't you?" Daniel asked with a smile. Ethan nodded eagerly. "It's amazing," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "There are so many worlds out there we don't even know about. And maybe there are people living on them too." Daniel chuckled softly. "Well, that's what scientists have been wondering for years. Some say yes, some say no. What do you think?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before answering. "I think it makes sense. The universe is so big, it wouldn't make sense if we were the only ones here." Daniel leaned back on the couch, nodding thoughtfully. "That's a good point, but whether or not there are others out there, I think the important thing is that we keep exploring. We should never stop asking questions." From then on, Daniel made it a habit to borrow more books from the library for Ethan. Together they read stories about astronauts traveling to Mars, theories about black holes, and ideas about how humans might someday live among the stars. On clear nights, they would set up the old telescope Daniel kept near the window and spend hours stargazing. Ethan loved naming constellations and pointing out planets, while Daniel marveled at how much joy these simple moments brought to the boy. However, there was something unusual about Ethan's interest in space. While other kids his age enjoyed science fiction movies and video games, Ethan seemed drawn to deeper, more mysterious aspects of the cosmos. He often talked about strange dreams he couldn't quite remember when he woke up. Dreams filled with bright lights, odd symbols, and machines that looked nothing like anything on Earth. At first, Daniel dismissed it as just part of a child's imagination. After all, Ethan had been through a lot, and it was natural for him to dream vividly. But one summer evening, as they were lying on blankets in the churchyard watching the stars, Ethan turned to Daniel with a serious expression. "Do you ever feel like you're supposed to be somewhere else?" he asked quietly. Daniel raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. "What do you mean, son?" "I don't know. Ethan admitted, frowning slightly. Sometimes I get this feeling in my chest, like I'm waiting for something. Or someone. Like there's a piece of me missing. Daniel didn't know how to respond right away. He studied Ethan's face, seeing the earnestness in his eyes. Finally, he placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. Life can feel confusing sometimes, especially when you're growing up. But wherever you're meant to be, I believe you'll find your way. Ethan nodded slowly, though he still looked troubled. For the rest of the night, neither of them spoke much. Instead, they simply watched the stars twinkling above, each lost in their own thoughts. Time continued to pass, and Ethan grew older. By the time he reached high school, he had become one of the top students in his class, particularly excelling in math and science. His teachers praised his intelligence and creativity, often encouraging him to pursue a career in engineering or astrophysics. Ethan took their advice to heart, spending countless hours studying and working on projects for school. During his senior year, Ethan applied to several colleges, hoping to earn scholarships that would allow him to leave the small town and explore bigger opportunities. When acceptance letters began arriving, Daniel felt a mix of pride and sadness. He was thrilled to see Ethan accomplishing so much, but he also knew that saying goodbye wouldn't be easy. On the day Ethan received his final acceptance letter from a prestigious university known for its cutting-edge research in space technology, he ran straight to Daniel with excitement written all over his face. "Look," he exclaimed, holding up the envelope. "They want me to study there." "That's wonderful news, Ethan," Daniel said, smiling despite the lump forming in his throat. "You've worked so hard for this. I'm so proud of you." Ethan hugged Daniel tightly, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you for everything," he said sincerely. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Daniel patted his back gently. "You're going to do great things, Ethan. Just promise me one thing, that you won't forget where you came from." "I promise," Ethan replied without hesitation. Before leaving for college, Ethan spent one last evening stargazing with Daniel. As they lay side by side under the vast night sky, Ethan suddenly pointed toward a bright object moving quickly across the horizon. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice tinged with awe. "It's moving too fast to be a plane." Daniel squinted at the object, unsure of what to make of it. "Could be a satellite," he suggested, "or maybe a shooting star." "No," Ethan insisted, shaking his head. "It's different. I've seen things like this before, in my dreams." Daniel glanced at Ethan, noticing the intensity in his gaze. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated, as if debating whether or not to share something deeply personal. "When I was younger, I used to dream about strange machines and glowing symbols. I thought it was just my imagination, but now, I'm not so sure. Sometimes I feel like those dreams are trying to tell me something." Daniel listened carefully, sensing that this was important to Ethan. "Whatever it is, I trust that you'll figure it out," he said finally. "And no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." Ethan smiled faintly, though his mind seemed elsewhere. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, a chapter that would take him far beyond the small town and into realms he could scarcely imagine. Little did either of them know, Ethan's journey was destined to lead him to answers far greater than they could have ever anticipated. And when those answers came, they would change not only Ethan's life, but the entire course of human history. Years passed since Ethan left for college, and life in the small town continued as it always had. Reverend Daniel Hayes grew older, his hair graying more with each passing season. He stayed busy tending to his congregation, leading services, and helping those in need. But despite how fulfilling his work was, there was a quiet ache in his heart, a longing for news from Ethan. At first, letters and emails arrived regularly. Ethan wrote about his studies, the friends he made, and the professors who inspired him. He told Daniel about working on projects involving advanced physics and engineering, though he never went into too much detail. Over time, however, the messages became less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Daniel tried not to worry. Ethan was a grown man now, building a life of his own. Still, The silence weighed heavily on Daniel. He often found himself gazing at the stars through the same old telescope they used to share, wondering where Ethan was and what he was doing. Then, one crisp autumn morning, everything changed. Daniel was walking back to the parsonage after visiting a sick member of his congregation when he noticed a sleek black car parked outside the church. It wasn't the kind of vehicle anyone in the small town would own. Curious, he approached cautiously. Before he could reach the car, the door opened, and out stepped a familiar figure. Ethan. But this wasn't the same Ethan who had left years ago. Gone was the shy, uncertain boy Daniel once knew. In his place stood a confident young man in his late 20s, dressed neatly in a leather jacket and jeans. His eyes sparkled with intelligence, but there was also a weight in them, a sense that he carried secrets far beyond anything Daniel could imagine. "Ethan," Daniel said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Is that really you?" "It's me, Daniel," Ethan replied, smiling warmly. Without another word, Daniel pulled him into a tight hug. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan stepped back and gestured toward the car. Two people emerged, both dressed in strange uniforms that seemed to shimmer faintly in the sunlight. Their outfits were unlike anything Daniel had ever seen, tight-fitting suits with intricate glowing lines running along the seams. "This is Commander Leora," Ethan said, introducing the taller of the two. She had sharp features and short, silver hair, her presence exuding authority. "And this is Captain Arik." The second figure nodded politely, his broad frame giving him an imposing yet friendly demeanor. Daniel blinked, unsure of what to say. Who are they?" "They're part of something much bigger than I can explain right now," Ethan replied. "Can we go inside? There's so much I need to tell you." Once they were seated in the living room of the parsonage, Ethan began to speak. What followed was a story that sounded like it belonged in one of the science fiction books Daniel used to read with Ethan as a boy. But this was no story. This was real. "When I was younger," Ethan started, his tone steady, but filled with emotion, "I didn't just dream about space. Those dreams weren't random. They were memories. Memories of another life. Another world." Daniel frowned, leaning forward slightly. "What do you mean?" "I'm not entirely human, Daniel," Ethan confessed. "Or at least not fully. When I was very young, before I ended up on the streets, I was part of an experiment conducted by beings from another planet. They call themselves the Unity Accord. They've been observing humanity for centuries, studying us, trying to understand if we're ready to join them in exploring the universe." The room fell silent. Daniel stared at Ethan, struggling to process what he'd just heard. Finally, he managed to ask, "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I've spent the last several years training with them," Ethan explained. "They chose me because of my resilience, my ability to adapt, and because of you, because of the way you saved me and gave me a chance at a normal life. You taught me compassion, faith, and courage. Those qualities are exactly what the Unity Accord values most." Commander Leora spoke up then, her voice calm but firm. "Reverend Hayes, your role in Ethan's life has been crucial. Without your intervention, he might never have reached his full potential. Now, we believe humanity is on the brink of a monumental change, one that will require leaders like yourself to guide others through it." Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't understand. What kind of change are you talking about?" "The Unity Accord plans to reveal itself to humanity within the next year," Ethan said. "They want to offer us knowledge, technology, and resources that could solve many of our problems. Hunger, disease, even climate change. But revealing their existence won't be easy. People will be scared, confused, maybe even angry. That's why they need someone trusted, someone who understands both faith and science, to help bridge the gap between fear and acceptance." "You're asking me to mediate between humans and aliens?" Daniel asked incredulously. "In a way, yes," Ethan replied. "You've spent your life bringing people together, helping them find hope in difficult times. Who better to help humanity take its first steps into the cosmos?" Daniel sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of what Ethan was asking. He looked at the faces around him, Ethan's earnest gaze, Commander Leora's steady confidence, Captain Arik's quiet strength, and realized this wasn't just about him. This was about something much larger, something that could shape the future of the entire world. "I'll need time to think about this," Daniel said finally. "Of course," Ethan said gently. "Take all the time you need. But please remember, Daniel, you've always believed in miracles. Maybe this is just another kind of miracle waiting to happen." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He paced the floor of the parsonage, his mind racing with questions. Was it possible? Could beings from another world truly exist? And if they did, could humanity handle such a revelation? Most importantly, was he the right person to lead others through this unimaginable transition? As dawn broke over the horizon, Daniel stepped outside and looked up at the sky. For the first time in years, he felt the same awe and wonder that Ethan used to show while stargazing. Somewhere out there among the stars lay answers to questions humanity had asked for centuries, and somehow, he and Ethan were being called to play a part in bringing those answers home. Though the road ahead would be uncertain, Daniel knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't face it alone. After days of prayer and reflection, Daniel finally made his decision. He couldn't deny the weight of what Ethan and the Unity Accord were asking of him, nor could he ignore the sense of purpose that had settled in his heart. This was more than just a mission. It was a calling, one that felt as though it had been placed there by something greater than himself. "I'll do it," Daniel told Ethan one evening as they sat together in the parsonage. "But I won't pretend I'm not scared. I've spent my life preaching faith, but this is beyond anything I ever imagined." Ethan smiled softly, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You don't have to have all the answers right away. Just be yourself. That's what makes you so special. You connect with people in a way no one else can." With that, preparations began. Over the next few weeks, Ethan introduced Daniel to members of the Unity Accord, teaching him about their culture, technology, and intentions. They explained how humanity stood on the brink of joining a vast interstellar community, a network of civilizations working together to explore the universe and solve shared challenges. But they also warned him, not everyone would welcome this news with open arms. Fear, skepticism, and even hostility were inevitable reactions. To prepare for the announcement, Daniel traveled across the country alongside Ethan and the Unity Accord representatives. Their goal was to meet with influential figures, scientists, politicians, religious leaders, and activists who could help spread understanding and acceptance when the truth was revealed. These meetings weren't easy. Some attendees dismissed the idea of extraterrestrial life outright, while others grew angry or fearful upon hearing the plans. In one particularly tense session, a senator leaned forward, slamming his fist on the table. "You expect us to believe this? To trust aliens over our own instincts? What if they're lying? What if they want to harm us?" Daniel took a deep breath before responding. "Fear is natural," he said calmly, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "But fear shouldn't stop us from seeking truth. Think about history. Every great leap forward came with risks. When humans first sailed across oceans, they didn't know what lay beyond the horizon. But they went anyway because they believed in the possibility of something better." He paused, letting his words sink in. "These beings aren't here to hurt us. They're offering us gifts, knowledge, technology, and opportunities we could only dream of. Yes, it's scary, but isn't hope worth the risk?" The senator fell silent, and though he didn't fully agree, he nodded reluctantly. It was moments like these that reminded Daniel why he'd agreed to take on this role. His ability to speak from the heart, to find common ground between opposing views, was exactly what the world needed right now. As the days turned into months, Daniel and Ethan worked tirelessly to build trust and prepare humanity for the coming revelation. Alongside them were Commander Leora and Captain Arik, who provided insight into the Unity Accord's motives and demonstrated their advanced technology in controlled settings. Holograms of distant planets, energy sources capable of ending global crises, and medical advancements that could cure diseases left audiences awestruck and sometimes skeptical. One of the most challenging aspects was addressing religious communities. Many feared that acknowledging alien life would undermine their beliefs. To tackle this, Daniel organized gatherings where he spoke openly about his own journey of reconciling faith with science. God's creation is infinite, he told a packed church auditorium during one such event. If there are other worlds out there, does that diminish God's power? Or does it expand our understanding of His greatness? Faith isn't about clinging to what we already know. It's about embracing the unknown and trusting that God walks with us, even into the stars. His words resonated deeply with many, earning him both admiration and criticism. Some accused him of straying from traditional teachings, but Daniel remained steadfast. He knew that true faith wasn't afraid of questions, it welcomed them. Finally, the day of the announcement arrived. Leaders from around the world gathered in a high-tech facility designed by the Unity Accord, its walls lined with screens displaying images of Earth and the cosmos. As cameras rolled and millions tuned in via live broadcasts, the Unity Accord officially revealed themselves to humanity. Commander Leora stepped forward, her presence commanding yet gentle. "We come in peace," she began, her voice clear and measured. "For centuries we have watched your species grow, learn, and struggle. You have shown resilience, creativity, and compassion. Now we offer you a chance to join us in exploring the wonders of the universe, not as subjects, but as equals." The audience listened intently as she outlined the benefits of collaboration, clean energy solutions, cures for illnesses, and technologies to combat climate change. Then it was Daniel's turn to speak. Standing at the podium, he looked out at the crowd and then into the camera, knowing billions were watching. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for humanity," he said. "It's okay to feel uncertain, to ask questions, to wonder what this means for our future. But let us remember who we are. A species driven by curiosity and hope. Let us choose unity over division, courage over fear, and love over hatred." His speech earned a standing ovation, and though not everyone agreed with the Unity Accord's plans, it sparked conversations worldwide. People debated, prayed, and dreamed about what this new era might bring. For Daniel, the experience was humbling. He realized that while he couldn't control how others reacted, he could continue being a voice of reason and compassion. And as he stood beside Ethan, watching the world grapple with this monumental shift, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the boy he'd once saved, for the journey they'd shared, and for the boundless possibilities ahead. Little did he know, the greatest adventure was still to come. The months following the Unity Accord's announcement were filled with both triumphs and challenges. Humanity was divided. Some embraced the idea of joining an interstellar community, while others resisted, clinging to fear and skepticism. Protests erupted in cities around the world, and conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. Yet amidst the chaos, there were also moments of hope. People gathered in parks and town squares to stargaze together, sharing dreams of what the future might hold. Scientists collaborated with Unity Accord engineers to develop solutions for Earth's most pressing problems, and medical breakthroughs saved countless lives. Through it all, Daniel remained a steady presence, traveling alongside Ethan and the Unity Accord representatives to address concerns and foster understanding. His message was simple. Change is never easy, but facing it with courage and compassion can lead to something extraordinary. He spoke in churches, schools, and community centers, reminding people that humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to adapt and grow. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Daniel found himself sitting with Ethan on a quiet hilltop overlooking the city. The stars above twinkled brightly, and the hum of distant traffic was the only sound breaking the silence. "You've done so much," Daniel said, turning to Ethan with a proud smile. "I'm not sure I could have handled everything you've been through." Ethan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You don't give yourself enough credit, Daniel. Without you, none of this would have been possible. You've been the bridge between worlds, Not just Earth and the Unity Accord, but between faith and science, fear and hope. Daniel sighed, gazing up at the stars. It's strange, isn't it? All my life I've looked to the heavens and prayed to God. Now here we are, standing on the edge of something so much bigger than I ever imagined. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. And you're still doing exactly what you've always done, helping people find their way. That hasn't changed. As they sat there, Commander Leora approached, her footsteps quiet against the grass. Reverend Hayes, may I speak with you? Of course, Daniel replied, standing to meet her. Leora gestured toward the city skyline. Tomorrow marks the beginning of the next phase of our mission. We'll be taking a select group of humans, including Ethan, to our homeworld for further training and diplomacy. It's a critical step in building trust between our peoples. Daniel's heart sank slightly at the thought of saying goodbye to Ethan again, but he quickly masked his emotions. That's wonderful news, he said sincerely. Ethan will do an incredible job representing humanity. He won't be alone, Leora added gently. We'd like you to join him. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. Me? But why? Because your voice matters, Leora explained. You've already proven that you can unite people across cultures and beliefs. On our world, you'll serve as an ambassador, a guide for those who struggle to understand humanity's diversity and potential. Your wisdom will be invaluable. For a moment, Daniel was speechless. The idea of leaving Earth, even temporarily, felt overwhelming. Yet deep down, he knew it was the right thing to do. If he wanted to help humanity take its place among the stars, he couldn't stay behind. I'll go, he said finally, his voice firm, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. The next morning, Daniel and Ethan boarded the spacecraft alongside a small delegation of scientists, leaders, and Unity Accord crew members. As the engines roared to life and the ship ascended into the sky, Daniel gripped the armrest of his seat tightly, his eyes glued to the window. Below them, Earth grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a pale blue dot suspended in the vastness of space. It's beautiful, isn't it? Ethan asked, leaning closer to Daniel. Yes, Daniel whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. It really is. Their journey to the Unity Accord's homeworld took several days, during which Daniel marveled at the wonders of space travel. Through the ship's windows, he saw galaxies swirling like cosmic paintings and nebulae glowing in vibrant colors. Ethan introduced him to advanced technologies that defied explanation, including holographic maps of the universe and devices capable of translating any language instantly. When they finally arrived, Daniel stepped onto alien soil for the first time. The landscape was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Rolling plains of iridescent grass beneath twin suns, with crystalline structures rising gracefully into the sky. The air smelled sweet, almost floral, and the light seemed to dance in a way that felt alive. Over the weeks that followed, Daniel immersed himself in learning about the Unity Accord's culture and history. He participated in ceremonies, exchanged stories with alien ambassadors, and even delivered speeches to crowds of curious beings. Though their appearances varied wildly, from towering insectoids to luminous energy forms, they shared a common desire for peace and progress. Throughout it all, Daniel kept his faith close to his heart. Each night he prayed under the alien stars, thanking God for guiding him to this moment. He realized that his belief hadn't diminished in the face of extraterrestrial life. It had expanded, growing deeper and richer with every new discovery. Eventually, it was time to return to Earth. As the spacecraft descended back toward their home planet, Daniel reflected on everything he'd experienced. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Humanity still had much to learn and overcome. But he also knew that the seeds of unity had been planted, and with care, they would grow. When they landed, Daniel and Ethan were greeted by cheering crowds eager to hear their stories. Together they worked to share the lessons they'd learned, inspiring others to look beyond their differences and embrace the infinite possibilities of the cosmos. In the final moments of their reunion, as they stood beneath the familiar night sky, Daniel placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You know," he said with a smile, I always believed you were destined for great things, but I never dreamed it would take us all the way to the stars." Ethan grinned, his eyes shining with gratitude. "And I never dreamed I'd have someone like you to show me the way." As they gazed upward, the stars seemed brighter than ever, a reminder that no matter how far humanity traveled, its journey was just beginning.